I'm going to go ahead and make up for it by doing yesterday's portion today as well as today's portion. We're starting with verse 14 of chapter 12 of Genesis, Bereshit. And there are a few things noted for 10 through 20 that we'll go over once we get through to 20. But it happened at the entry of Avram into Egypt, the Egyptians saw the woman that beautiful was she to the utmost. When see her did the officials of Pharaoh, they praised her as worthy for Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to the palace of Pharaoh. This is talking about Avram's wife, Sarai. And for Avram it went well for her sake, and there belonged to him sheep, cattle, donkeys, slaves, and maidservants, females, donkeys, and camels. You know what? I'm not doing it in Hebrew, so I'm going to switch to the other book that is in proper. That reads it the proper direction. Or the English way of reading, at least. The one I'm reading right now is in transliteration, which means the words are in order of their actual order. If I were reading it in Hebrew, which I am not. Start over. And so it happened that when Avram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the lady was very attractive. Pharaoh's ministers saw her, and they praised her among themselves that she was fit for Pharaoh. The lady was taken to the house of Pharaoh. He bestowed gifts on Avram because of her. So Avram had flocks, cattle, donkeys, manservants, maidservants, she-donkeys, and camels. God afflicted Pharaoh and his household with a severe disease because Sarai, Avram's wife, told an angel to do so. Pharaoh summoned Avram, and he said, "What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, causing me to take her as a wife for myself? Look, here is your wife. Take her and go." Pharaoh gave men orders to protect Avram. They escorted him and his wife and all their possessions. Yesterday or from the day before. There's a lot to read right now. Okay. Well, first off, we're going to go with the book. One side. Avram in Egypt, verses 10 through 20. This is another test of Abraham's faith. Immediately after he settled in the new homeland where Hashem had promised him every manner of blessing, there was a famine. Though this seemed to be a direct contradiction of Hashem's glowing promises, Abraham's faith did not waver. This event foreshadowed Yaakov's descent to Egypt because of a famine. In view of Sarah's great beauty, this test was especially difficult because the Egyptians were notorious for their immorality. Now Abraham and Sarah would be at the mercy of the Egyptians, who might lust after her and kill him. Knowing that he and Sarah would be in grave danger in Egypt if they came as man and wife, Abraham claimed that she was his sister. Could Abraham have told an outright lie to say she was his sister if she really was his niece? The sages explain that a man often refers to his relative as a sister. Though Abraham thought that this ruse would protect Sarah as well as himself, Rambam comments that it was a great sin for him to put her in danger. Nor was the ruse effective against Pharaoh, the only person who did not need to negotiate for Abraham's sister, and who would not be publicly immoral as to kill Abraham to take his wife. Uh, 13, that was still from yesterday, but okay. This is from Sundays, so that, from verse 13, so that it may go well with me for your sake, i.e., they will give me gifts. The sense that's too far. The sense of Abraham's statement was that if the nobles of Egypt were to shower him with gifts to win his sister's hand, the masses would be afraid to harm him, and Sarah's safety would be assured. But his plan did not succeed, for Sarah's exceptional beauty brought about a different turn of events. Verse 16, and there belonged to him, in sharp contrast to his later behavior toward the king of Sodom, from whom he was entitled to monetary compensation, but vehemently refused to accept anything. Abraham did accept lavish gifts from Pharaoh. In the context of Abraham's claim that Sarah was his sister, and the implication that he would allow her to marry a suitable person, Abraham had no choice. Had he refused gifts, he would have aroused Pharaoh's suspicions. Verse 17, but Hashem afflicted. God smote Pharaoh and his household with a debilitating skin disease that made cohabitation impossible, thus assuring that Sarah's chastity would be safeguarded. The verse mentions that she was the wife of Abraham because it was in his merit too that Hashem punished Pharaoh. 18 through 19. Pharaoh called Abram. Although Pharaoh suspected that his affliction was because of Sarah, he could not be certain she was Abraham's wife. He made the accusation in order to draw the truth from Abraham. Then Abraham did not respond. When Abraham did not respond, Pharaoh realized that his suspicion was correct. So he ordered Abraham to take his wife and leave. By asking, "Why did you not tell me?" Pharaoh implied that even if Abraham distrusted the morality of the Egyptian masses, he surely could have confided in Pharaoh. Rashi notes that unlike Abimelech, who invited Abraham to settle in his country after a similar abduction of Sarah, Pharaoh told Abraham to leave Egypt because he knew that Abraham and Sarah could not be safe anywhere in his immoral country. 20, and they sent away. Pharaoh hastened to rid himself of the cause of his divine affliction, but not wishing to incur Hashem's further wrath by mistreating Abraham and Sarah, he sent them away in honor, guaranteeing that no evil would befall him. Let's see. Other signs that Abraham and Sarah Okay, so Sparks of Hasidut talks about Hasidic thought explains that Abraham and Sarah's descent into Egypt was a precursor of the Egyptian exile. Abraham's escape from Egypt was, as a wealthy man, opened the spiritual channels of redemption that enabled his children to leave Egypt laden with gold and silver. Similarly, Sarah's extreme caution against becoming defiled by Pharaoh later empowered her descendants, the Jewish women in Egypt, with the strength to remain faithful to their families. Okay, starting with chapter 13. And there's commentary on 1 through 6. So we'll do 1 through 6 first. Avram went up from Egypt to the south of the land of Israel. Both he, his wife, and all their possessions, together with Lot. Avram was heavily laden with cattle, silver, and gold. He journeyed, retracing the same route and the same lodgings from the south, i.e. Egypt, passing Beit Al, until reaching the place where his tent had been previously, between Beit Al and Ai. Between Beit Al. Beit Ai or A? What's it saying here? Beit El. Beit El, okay. Between Beit El and Beit El and Beit I. Okay, so it's I. Between Beit El and I, at the site of the altar which he had made there to start with. Avram prayed there in the name of God. And starting the third reading with verse 5. Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and cattle and tents. The pasture of the land was insufficient for them to live together, for they possessed many cattle that needed to graze, so they failed to live together. A quarrel erupted between the herdsmen of Avram's cattle, who rebuked the herdsmen of Lot's cattle for grazing on other people's property. Lot's herdsmen argued that Lot would inherit the whole land one day in any case, but in truth it was theft, because the Canaanites and the Perizzites were inhabiting the land at that time. The return to Eretz Yisrael, verse 1. And Avram went up. Although it is literally true that Abraham ascended because the terrain of Eretz Yisrael is higher than that of Egypt, the Zohar perceives in the verb the additional indication that Abraham ascended spiritually from the lower degrees of Egypt. He left a place of spiritual pollution and returned to his former higher condition. To signify this resumption of his mission of proclaiming Hashem's name, Abraham returned to the altar where he had declared his devotion when he first arrived in the land. Verse 3, on his journeys, the implication is that these journeys were part of a known itinerary, implying that Abraham lodged in the same places where he stayed on his way to Egypt. The sages comment that the Torah mentions this insignificant detail to teach proper etiquette. One should not change his customary lodgings unless he has suffered harassment and anguish there. Otherwise, one discredits himself, as he will be considered hard to please or disreputable, or he will give the impression that his lodgings were unsatisfactory, thus harming his host's reputation. Alternatively, Abraham went to the same places to pay the bills he had incurred on his trip to Egypt. The teachers of Musar ethics, derive a lesson in frugality from Abraham's behavior. On the way to Egypt, he was not yet as wealthy, so he must have used inexpensive accommodations. On the way back, though, he was much wealthier. He did not waste money on unnecessary luxury. Continuing with verse 8 and 9, and then there's commentary on 6 through 9. Avram said to Lot, "Please don't let there be a quarrel between me and you, between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are relatives. Don't you have the whole land in front of you to choose from? Please part from me. If you go left, I will go not too far to the right to support you. And if you go right, I will go not too far to the left to support you." Abraham and Lot part ways. The lust for wealth brings out the worst in people. Abraham resisted it completely, but Lot allowed it to warp his judgment until, as the succeeding passages indicate, it destroyed nearly all of his family. Verse 7, and there was a quarrel. Lot's dishonest shepherds grazed their flocks on other people's pastures. When Abraham's shepherds rebuked them for this, they responded that Hashem had promised the land to Abraham, and since he was childless, Lot was his heir, and the land was his. However, the verse specifically negates this contention by emphasizing that the Canaanites and Perizzites were still in the land. Abraham had not yet become the legitimate owner. Verse 8, let there not please be strife. Abraham wanted peace, but understood that the only way to avoid strife was for him to separate from Lot. So too, in the future, Hashem in his wisdom decreed that Israel was not to be friendly with Lot's descendants. For anyone who tried to show them mercy would suffer humiliation and war. The Torah loves peace, and Abraham exemplified peace, but any person who seeks peace in opposition to the wisdom of the Torah courts disaster. In verse 9, if you go left, then I will go right. Directions are given assuming that one is facing east, with right being south and left being north. In front refers to the east, and behind refers to the west. Thus, when Abraham told Lot to go either to the right or to the left, he assumed that Lot would continue grazing his flocks in the central mountain range of Eretz Yisrael. When Lot chose to go to the east, he was choosing to give up Abraham's way of life. The next part is for 10 through 13. Lot chooses money over morality. Lot surveyed the land, and he saw that the entire plain of the Jordan until Zoar, which was well irrigated before God destroyed Sodom and Amorah, And that's Gomorrah. Verse 10. Yeah, Sodom and Gomorrah. With trees like the garden of God, and fertile like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan. Lot was a wicked, Sparks of Hasidut talks about it. Lot was a wicked man. His corrupted attitude led Abraham to please part from me. When they parted company, Lot said, I care neither for Avram nor for his God. And of all places, Lot chose to settle in Sodom, whose inhabitants were perverted and corrupted to Hashem to the extreme. This begs the question, why is Lot's story recorded at all in Parsha Lecha? The theme of this Parsha is the Mesirat Nefesh, self-sacrifice, and devoted service of Abraham to Hashem. So why is it of any relevance to read of Lot's corrupt actions and heretical beliefs? The Torah tells us Lot's story not to inform us of his wickedness per se, but rather to teach us about the extent of Abraham's influence on him. Abraham's goal was that even a wicked person such as Lot should come to appreciate Hashem and have self-sacrifice to observe a mitzvah. So even when it became necessary for Abraham to send Lot away, Abraham still kept a strong connection with him, saying, wherever you live, I will not distance myself from you, and I will stand by you as a protector and a helper. Abraham's commitment to Lot was so strong that he was willing to risk his life to fight a war against the 4 kings to save Lot. And it was this that finally convinced Lot of the greatness of Abraham and the truth of his teachings. Thus we find that even though Lot remained wicked and dwelled in Sodom, he was nevertheless inspired by Abraham's self-sacrifice, to the extent that he too risked his own life in order to welcome guests. Verse 11. So Lot chose for himself the entire plain of Jordan. Lot traveled from the east westward, and they parted from one another. And Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan. Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and he pitched tents for his shepherds and cattle as far as Sodom. The people of Sodom were intentionally perverted and corrupt to God to the extreme. So Lot chooses money over morality. Verse 10 through 13. Seeing that the two could not continue to be together, Abraham gave Lot the first choice of where to live. Lot chose the richest part of the country, even though it was also the cruelest and most corrupt. Perhaps he thought that he could enjoy the Sodomites' wealth without being affected by their evil. He was wrong. Verse 10. That all of it was well irrigated. The Jordan Valley is similar to the Nile Valley in that a river which is not dependent on rain constantly flows down the center of the valley and provides water for irrigation. Lot chose the Egyptian way of life, where he would not have to look for Hashem's help for his income. As Pharaoh exclaimed, "Who is Hashem that I should heed his voice?" Since the Nile was was his Hashem, was his God, and it wasn't Hashem. 11. From the east, since the word Kadem can also be understood as the Ancient One, Lot separated himself from Hashem and the Ancient One of the world, saying, I want neither Abraham nor his Hashem. And thus they parted. Though Lot contained the spiritual sparks that were to produce Ruth, the ancestress Though Lot contained the spiritual sparks that were to produce Ruth, the ancestress of King David, he parted from Avram. In time, the rift between them, their progeny, would become so absolute that his male descendants from Ammon and Moab would be prohibited from entering the congregation of Israel. Goes to next part is for 14 through 18, which is the last part of the third portion of Lecha. The repetition of the promise. After Lot's departure, Hashem repeated his promise to Abraham to emphasize that the land had been given exclusively to him and his descendants, not to Lot. God said to Avram, after Lot had parted from him, please raise your eyes and from the place where you are positioned, look northward, southward, eastward, and westward. Because I will give all the land that you see to you and to your descendants for eternity. I will make your descendants like the soil of the earth. Just as a man is not able to count the soil particles of the earth, so too your descendants will not be able to be counted. Get up and walk through the land across its length and its breadth, for I am going to give it to you. Avram pitched his tent with Sarai, since he had now been promised children, and he settled in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron. He built an altar to God there. Verse 15, to you will I give it, the possession of the land, so that you can take possession of the land, so that you can bequeath it to your descendants. For in the legal sense, Eretz Israel is a legacy from the patriarchs. In the plain meaning, Hashem was assuring Abraham that even then the inhabitants of Canaan would honor him as if he were already a ruler forever. Hashem did not say that Jews would always possess the land, for during the long centuries of exile they certainly did not. But that the nation of Israel and the land of Israel would always be destined for each other, just as it was given to Abraham, though he never took legal possession of it in his lifetime. Verse 16, as the dust of the earth, just as dust outlives all who tread upon it, so Hashem promised Abraham that his offspring would outlive all the nations that would persecute them. This is both, for verse 17, this is both a promise and a command, a promise of Hashem's protection while Abraham roamed freely through the land, and a command that he walk through it to symbolize that he was taking possession of Hashem's gift. Verse 18, as he had done before, Abraham expressed his gratitude for Hashem's prophecy by erecting an altar. That's all from part 2 and 3. Tomorrow's reading will be starting chapter 14. We're done for today. A little confusing going back and forth. So maybe I'll just read the whole portion in the future and then do the side or the commentaries afterward, or maybe even just match the commentaries with each verse if there's probably just do I'll do the whole portion and then I'll do the commentary afterward, because going back and forth is kind of confusing. Going to the commentary is a little bit confusing in itself, regardless of whether I go back and forth. I'm not even sure if I should be reading the commentary. Either way, that's all for today. All right. Have a wonderful day. A blessed week. Shavua Tov. See you everyone. Hopefully, I'll be able to do tomorrow's without any issue.